Since we've been home, many have asked if I will be sharing thoughts and reflections on the trip, and the time has come. But first, I want to begin with some words of Torah and a quick reflection or synopsis on our Torah portion this week. Our Torah portion is Tzav. We have now entered into the beginnings of the book of Leviticus, as we are now just about halfway through this Jewish year. And Tzav is filled with sacrifices, animal sacrifices, and the descriptions of the different sacrifices. The burnt offering, the sin offering, the guilt offering, the thanksgiving offering. For the whole breadth of human emotions, our ancestors responded by sacrificing an animal, offering it upon the altar, and seeing its burnt, smoky remains rising up into the heavens. And the culmination of our Torah portion features a most particular sacrifice. And that was part of the ritual for the ordination of priests. How does one go from being an ordinary person to being the sacred ones who represent the people Israel before God and offer these sacrifices? An elaborate ritual, proper dress, anointing oil, but also blood. A sacrificial cow, and then a sacrificial ram. And the blood of that ram is spread over the ear of Aaron, upon his finger and on his big toe. And that blood is then sprinkled upon him and his sons and upon the altar. And thus they are consecrated as priests, the altar designated for the worship of Adonai, our God. Today, as we know, we do not offer up animals for sacrifice. Instead, we offer the words of our mouth. And while we today have ceremonies of ordination, I was at one. At my ordination, Rabbi Elaine's ordination, there was no blood spread over our ears or sprinkled upon us. But a ritual was performed and laying on of hands. And so the spirit of these rituals carry on. But more than the spirit, the particulars and the blood are remembered. That covenant of blood, that Brit Dam, as we retell this Torah portion every year and recall our ancient ways. And now, the trip. I want to confess something to you that I have not shared with the congregation, and that was in the days leading up to the trip, even the weeks, I was not excited about it. And in times actually kind of dreaded it. I was going primarily out of a sense of duty, obligation. I felt compelled that I needed to go, even though I didn't really want to go. It didn't seem like a lot of fun. It seemed like a lot of effort and expense, but worth doing, but not something I was, yay. It turned out to be deeply meaningful and far more pleasant than either Rabbi or Elaine or I possibly imagined. But why we went came, I will speak for me, out of a sense of guilt that I am here and not there. Israelis are there. They are at risk while I am here in safety. They offer their children and grandchildren into service and certain danger, and I do not. I make contributions, but they pay taxes at a rate far higher than any American pays, and we complain. They pay at an enormous rate to help fund all of the hardships and to defend their tiny little strip of land against threats constantly from all sides. Now, I am resigned to being American. I feel very secure that I have a role here. In fact, I am confident that I am more helpful here than I would be if I made Aliyah and lived in Israel. Israel needs a strong and vibrant American Jewish community, and I can help with that, and I do. Therefore, I am secure in my place, in my role. But it's not the same. So we felt that call to go and help, to pitch in, to volunteer. Now, there are a lot of different trips that are going to Israel, and the truth is, I kind of scoffed at most of the other American trips going to Israel because they're just going and being and seeing, and I felt we need to just go in and pitch in and do our part. That meant, for me, doing dishes. A lot of dishes and weeding. Who would have thought that what Israel needs is me doing dishes and pulling weeds? And yet, when we went to these pop-up stations that serve Israeli soldiers hamburgers who are on their off day from the base, and they've got all these, Jewish mamas and grandmas, cooking. They don't need me in the kitchen. But boy, did they have a lot of dishes. And so that's what we did. But the truth is, Israel is in tremendous need right now. Over 100,000 Israelis remain displaced, even as the southern communities have been people have returned home into the communities around Gaza and Sderot. Up in the north, there's still over 100,000 people along the Lebanon border who are out of their home, living with cousins, sleeping on floors and sleeping in hotels. And there's a terrible need of a workforce. That's what happens when 200,000 working age people get called up to service when the whole country only has 8 million people. That's what happens when basically all of the Thai workers who worked the fields left when 20 of them were killed and 10 of them kidnapped on October 7th. The rest went back home, and they just need people to do the basic things of the economy and life. So we got to Israel, and this is what we found. We found a nation still grieving. Everyone in Israel has been to 15 funerals of people who died on October 7th, for the soldiers who've died since. Everybody knows people who have died. On our trip, Rabbi Elaine and I made a condolence call to a friend. While you might not know him, you can appreciate him. His name is Joseph Gittler. He was the founder of Leket, Israel's food bank. He's someone I admire tremendously and have been honored to call a friend. 2 years ago, their oldest daughter, got married, and everybody, I'm on the board of the American Friends of Leket, and we all got together and, pitched in and got a really nice present for the bride and the groom. The groom was killed in Gaza 2 months ago, and the bride is now a widow. And we went to Joseph's home, and he's back to trying to be productive and live his life and get their youngest teenage son to do his homework. But the home is a home of brokenness, and pictures everywhere of their son-in-law and all of the campaigns he's working on now to preserve his name and memory. So Israel is grieving, and Israel is also reeling in shock at their vulnerability. What happened to them was unfathomable, and their minds are still trying to get around it. And they're reeling from the hostages. The hostages are ever present in Israel. Billboards everywhere. Private property, office buildings have banners. Every town has at their entrance pictures of hostages from that town. It is a constant presence in Israeli society. And everyone in Israel is 1 degree separated from a hostage. My next door neighbor's cousin, my wife's former student. Everyone is that 1 or that 2 degree separation from a hostage. So Israel is grieving and reeling. But that's not all. Israel is also resilient and united, and it's hard for me to even say it, but even elated. Now, I had heard that was true. In fact, Gil told me that he hears it from his friends, and I heard it from someone else too, that there's a spirit in Israel right now, a spirit of togetherness and camaraderie that is lifting the nation. And I heard that was true, but until I saw it, I didn't fully believe it or understand it. But this is it. 6 months ago, Israel was a divided nation, torn asunder. You saw 1 million people protesting. You saw liberals against conservatives, Westerners versus Easterners. You saw secular versus Orthodox, ripped apart. 2 Israels. Would it stand? Would it last? And October 7th, everyone is united. They recognize they've got problems. That's for another day. They're united and they all hate Netanyahu, but they'll deal with that later. Right now, he's their elected prime minister and leading the unity government. All the other issues are second, third, and down the list. And they are feeling a sensation. One after another had said, I never thought I would see this Israel again. I never thought in my lifetime I would once again see Israel united, neighbors sacrificing, helping, everyone pitching in, no one complaining, everyone holding hands, and let's do this. And it is truly a euphoria. Another surprise. What our presence there meant. Just our presence alone. I said that I had scoffed at other people's trips that weren't really working. I was wrong. It's enough to go. When we delivered your letters to soldiers, they felt wonderful. When we brought goods to the lone soldiers, knitted hats knitted by temple members, they smiled broadly. I talked to one of the soldiers that we had handed letters to, and he pulled me aside, and he says, "You don't know what this means." He said, "I've already," well, the English would be like tours, but that's not really the right term, but he'd already been into Gaza twice on 2 missions, extended, and he knows he's about to go back in. He says, feeling you with us, feeling all American Jews, all of the support with us, it means the world. Because Israel knows how alone they are right now. They see how the world is lining up against them. So every measure of support means so much right now. And I also want to share something we've all known about Israel, but just reaffirmed. And that was the intimacy. We all know how small Israel is and how everyone knows everyone. You go to Tel Aviv and into Hostage Square, and the tents are set up, and there's the families. It's not something over there or, out of mind or out of sight, because they're right there. And you walk into the tents, and they show you the pictures of the ones that they're missing. And you just look at them and wonder how do they eat? How do they get dressed in the morning? How could they function when their daughter is captive, when their husband is captive? Many of us were together at lunch with the rabbi a month ago. Most were here in the social hall. I was on Zoom from our hotel room on the night of our first day. For those who were there know that we arrived that day, got at 6 a.m., because whatever, that's the way it works, got our rental car, and we drove straight from Ben Gurion to a kibbutz along the border of Gaza called Mealine. Mealine is right on Gaza's edge, and on October 7th, it was invaded from 3 places on that day. But unlike the kibbutz just to the north of them, just to the south of them, and right adjacent to them, no one was killed on that kibbutz. They lucked out in a way in that they saw them in the midst of all the rockets. They were actually fleeing back to their homes because they were all camping out on a big Simchat Torah celebration. And so they saw the attackers coming, and they also happened to have quite a few Israeli soldiers on Shabbat leave with their guns. So they had people and weaponry and were able to hold them at bay. But they had to evacuate like all the other kibbutzim. And so for 3 months, they couldn't go home. In fact, they were just allowed to go back to their fields a couple weeks before we got there. And we went to pick pomelos because the pomelos in the orchards were ripe and needed to get to market. And they just needed everybody to go there. And by the way, we pull up that day, and when we pull up, there was a bus. We didn't know there was going to be there, but there was a bus sponsored by Leket. It had a big Leket banner filled with people from Tel Aviv and Jerusalem who had come down for the day to pick pomelos all day and then go back to their homes. It felt great to be with Israelis and to be pitching in. And as I talked about that day, for those of you on that Zoom, it felt good to be all scratched up by the thorns from the tops of pomelo trees. My guilt of my comfort somehow needed to be assuaged by the blood itself and the scrapes and the digging into the dirt or whatever it takes. I am a modern intellectual man, but I cannot deny the physicality of viscerally working the soil like the early Zionists talked about. I understood in new ways on this trip. But I mentioned the intimacy. So Mifalsim is right on the border. So while we're picking these pomegranates, we constantly heard the mortar fire. And we didn't just hear it, you feel it. Boom, boom. Now these were our soldiers, these were our shells firing into Gaza. But that's how close we were. But let me just explain one more thing about Israel again to you who all know. Mifalsim is on the border of Gaza. When we drove from Ben Gurion to Mifalsim, that is 46 miles. 46 miles is from this sanctuary to the Dali Museum in St. Pete. So Ben Gurion, at the heart, the very center of Israel, the midst of the population centers, right between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, is from here to the Dali Museum in downtown St. Pete. That's the distance from Ben Gurion to that kibbutz. And now I just want to share one more story. Our whole group, as part of the JNF mission, went to a town called Shlomit. It's hard to call it a town. It was a new settlement trying to establish as a town in the Negev, in the parched, driest of sands. It is on the Egypt border and just 2 miles from the Gaza Strip. Shlomit is a religious moshav. The community are all religious young families. So everybody there has kids. So, all of the parents are basically in their 30s, maybe 40s. Israelis start late with the kids. And just filled with kids. And we went there, we pitched in. Jack and I were making picnic tables. Most of the group was painting. Elaine, I imagine, got some paint on the intended target. But all I saw afterwards was a lot of paint on Rabbi Elaine everywhere, on her clothes, shoes, and everything. But I'm sure some got on the walls of the rooms they were painting. We did what we could. So why were we helping in Shlomit? Shlomit had just come back 2 weeks before and the school had just reopened that week. And so they were just now back in their homes, but we were trying to make it nicer for them after it had been lying fallow for a few months. On October 7th, Shlomit was bombarded with rockets, explosive rockets. But no terrorists invaded Shlomit. But they got the call that the kibbutz next to them was under attack. So Shlomit has its neighborhood defense force, like we all have neighborhood associations. These people collect dues, these do this. They have one that's for their security as well. And so they have volunteers. So they get the call that the kibbutz next door, well, just down the road, is under attack from terrorists from Gaza that desperately need help. So now what do? Do you go there, or do you stay and protect your own family? Because if they're under attack, your homes are going to be under attack. Another complication. This is a politically conservative religious moshav. The kibbutz I told you about, you should already be aware what is their political orientation. They're going to be far liberal. In fact, that kibbutz was the first settlement in this whole area. So it's not just that they're liberal, but they're like old-time Israeli lefty liberals from generations back. And it's mostly a senior community. So the call comes from your political opposites, the ones that are voting against you, the ones that are protesting your voted in government. What do? Well, the guards of Shlomit, the neighborhood association of protectors, got in their cars and they went to the kibbutz. And they fought and they fought and they pushed away the terrorists, and ultimately the terrorists fled, and not a single member of that kibbutz was killed. But the moshav lost 4 men in that fight. 4 men are dead. There are now 4 widows in that little community of about 200 homes. 15 children now without fathers. We met one of the widows, and while she didn't speak English, an interpreter helped her answer our questions. Someone asked about how she could be religious. She said, God doesn't owe me anything. God doesn't owe me anything. She was blessed to have her husband for as long as she did. She's blessed to have her children. There will be more blessings ahead for her, even while she mourns in grief. She referred to her husband as a korban. A korban is a burnt offering, a sacrifice. Someone in the group asked, Are you closer now with that kibbutz after all of the people, after all of this has happened? They translated the question to her, and she said, Dam Brit, a covenant of blood. Friends, when we read the newspaper, go on social media, turn on the news, the world is focused on suffering in Gaza. We too should be mindful of suffering in Gaza. And what is happening to the children of Gaza is its own tragedy that I will be addressing soon, but not tonight. But part of what it means to go to Israel, or for a congregation to send a delegation to Israel, is to be mindful of the constant suffering and struggle and the pain that Israel is still feeling. Israel can't stop this fight. Israel cannot tolerate Hamas. Israel cannot be okay with hostages. Not when we hear from the freed hostages about the brutality of their suffering. I want to conclude with a quote, not my own, but from someone else on the trip. Many of you were at dinner earlier and heard some things shared. I was lucky enough to get an advance copy of one of our trip mates' words, Howard Kilman. And what he wrote really summed up how I'm feeling. He said, I'm not certain our few days of painting walls, clearing fields, constructing gift baskets for soldiers, weeding, or tending to sheep and goats. He really did do that. I'm not sure it amounted to a truly significant impact for Israel, but I am certain it was good for us to get our hands dirty and do something for Israel during her time of need. That's exactly how I feel. I went there to go help, but whatever good I might have done in Israel was greatly, overwhelmingly blotted out by the effect Israelis have had on me. And not just me, I promise you, everyone was with us on this trip. Some of you with goods you sent with us, letters you sent with us, but all of you with prayers that you sent with us. It has changed me, but more so, it has reaffirmed in me who I am, what is my place, who are my people, and why I'm so proud to stand with them. Am Yisrael Chai.